Cool. Okay, we are rolling. We are live yet again on the Hoplite channel. You are here with me, your host, Hop, and you clicked on this new video because you chose to see Norse Literature, the Hávamál, part one and the only part. So for everybody returning from the previous series I did on samurai literature, thank you for returning. If this is your first time, welcome. So we're going to cover Norse Lit for this series. If you're curious about samurai literature, you can find that playlist on my channel, and a previous series on Stoicism if that happens to tickle your fancy as well. But you came here to see a video on Norse Lit, and in particular the Hávamál. So yeah, I decided to take the channel back to the west from the east. We finished with feudal Japan and the samurai literature series, and yeah, I figured it made sense. So we started in Greece and Rome with Stoicism. We moved to Japan with samurai lit on Bushido, and now we're coming north now to the land of the Norse to read some Norse literature and discuss. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the Hávamál. So what did the Hávamál mean? Well, Hávamál translates to words of the High One. Who is the High One? Well, that would be Odin, aka Wodan, aka Wotan, aka Sir Anthony Hopkins. Okay, I made that one up. But the All-Father, right? He's the king of the gods in Norse mythology. He is the spear shaker, right? The spear god, the god of war. He's the one-eyed traveler you can see right here, pretty spooky. Yeah. Oh, and I got my Viking emoji too. So I know, right? Like Vikings didn't wear horns on their helmets. That's made up. But how are you going to know what we're talking about? You know, the emoji has to have horns on the helmet. So there you have it. So yeah, the All-Father, Odin. These words in the Hávamál are allegedly his. So when you read this book, it's kind of like, I wouldn't call it like the Norse Bible, as in the Word of God. But when you read the words, they are meant to be taken as though the All-Father himself spoke it to mankind to take lessons from. So, but what is it? We understand it to be gnomic poetry. And, you know, to make that simple, that is simply meaningful sayings in memorable verse, right? And you can see this style of poetry in other cultures, and in particular, it was used in ancient Arabia and Persia, as well as India. But it also had popularity in 6th century BC in Greece. There are several poets in the 6th century BC Greece that use this gnomic form of poetry to entertain and to enlighten, right? So, but the Hávamál itself, like, did it exist on its own? And the answer is no. It is actually found in a book called, or a volume of books called the Codex Regius. It's Latin, which means the King's Book. And this was believed to have been compiled and written around 1270 AD. So we're kind of coming out of the Dark Ages now into maybe a period of Renaissance, which is still kind of a ways off, and then Enlightenment. But yeah, so not all things were dark in the Dark Ages. There were still writings, there were still works of art done, although not nearly as much as the pre-Dark Age period during the Roman Empire, and of course not nearly as much that was completed during the Renaissance or the Enlightenment. But we find that the Codex Regius, which was written around 1270, was an Icelandic compilation of poems and stories, or gnomic poetry. And it lay dormant for some time. It was rediscovered, however, in 1643 AD by a bishop of Skálholt. And the Bishop of Skálholt, obviously, this was when Christianity was taking root in Scandinavia, and in particular Iceland. And this bishop discovered the work in 1643 and preserved it for future people to enjoy. So yeah, with Christianity, especially during the Dark Ages and later, helped revive this interest in literature, poetry, prose, etc. And Skálholt, I believe, is about maybe an hour or two east of Reykjavik, Iceland. So it's not really in the middle of nowhere, but it's kind of getting there. Anyway, it's believed that perhaps the Codex Regius and maybe the Hávamál was used to convert pagans to Christianity. And it may seem counterintuitive to use the teachings of the Allfather to persuade people to consider Christianity, but this was the method that early Christian settlers in Scandinavia, in pagan lands, this is the method they had to use to try to persuade these individuals, the Norse, to give up their pagan ways and to consider coming to monotheism with Christianity. So they wove Christianity into the stories and teachings of their pagan tradition, of the gods of the Aesir and the Vanir, the giants, the trolls, the dwarves, the elves. Yeah, and that's a good thing too. Is J.R.R. Tolkien, who's a well-renowned writer, English writer, who gave us the Lord of the Rings series and The Hobbit. Devout Christian. He, as we'll see, C.S. Lewis, he lifted, not, I won't say directly from Norse mythology, but very, very heavily from Norse mythology. And we see that his influence on the fantasy genre of literature would be almost non-existent if not for the Norse gods and the Norse myths. But it's believed that perhaps the Codex Regius and the Hávamál were written during a period where Scandinavia and the Nordic countries were moving from a pagan culture into a Christian culture. Right. And I didn't call this Viking literature because I think that's kind of a misnomer. I mean, it sounds cool, like there's a show Vikings, and I think there's a video game Assassin's Creed, Valhalla coming out, so it's going to deal with the Viking Age. That's fine. But a Viking literally is an action. So like a Vike was a raider. And to go Viking, for a Vike to Viking to go on a raid, described what he was doing. So if you were in the Norse country and said, oh, you're Vikings, yeah, maybe some of them were. Maybe some of them were raiders from time to time. But it wasn't everything that had to do with their culture. It was a big part of their culture, obviously, because that's how they became famous and notorious. But I thought Norse was more fit, more apt for this. Anyway, let's get to some readings of the Hávamál and we'll discuss. But before I do that, I figured I would get myself in the mood here and pour a beverage. And I've got my vessel right here. Oh yeah. My drinking horn so we can enjoy some Norse literature, right? Okay, cheers. Skål. Oof, you can really taste the aspartame. All right, so we got the Hávamál right here. It's the pocket Hávamál. I think you can pick this up on Amazon or wherever. Probably less than $10. It's not even 50 pages. So, like I said, it's not quite a Bible if you want to take it that literally. But they have some good little lessons in here, and we'll talk. And I'll provide a read along as I go, so you can follow. And they're written in stanzas, and the stanzas are numbered. Co-stanzas. Okay, let's begin right now with stanza 16. And the High One wrote, "A cowardly man thinks he will ever live. If warfare he avoids, but old age will give him no peace, though spears may spare him." Okay, so that one's very similar to what we were saying in the samurai literature series, that a cowardly man thinks that he will live forever if he avoids war. But old age will give you no peace because you will become broken down. You will become wore out from all the years of toiling and living. Even though spears may spare you in warfare, you're not getting out of this easy. And especially in 1270, life was quite hard. So if a cowardly man ran away from battle, you could say that he was only giving himself more time to delay the inevitable, and that it was going to be no less painful and no more peaceful than those who died in combat. Right. Let's move to the next stanza. Okay, this is a few. We have stanzas 24 through 27 and then stanza 29. I'll read 24 first. A foolish man thinks all who on him smile to be his friends. He feels it not, although they speak ill of him when he sits among the clever. Okay, yeah, this is written like Yoda wrote this, right? So a foolish man thinks all who on him smile to be his friends. This is advising people who are reading this that just because people come to you with smiles and handshakes and embrace you as a brother, they mistake this kindness for friendship. So don't be so quick to extend friendship to people who give you these courtesies, who give you this smile, because some things aren't always as they appear to be. And just because the surface is pleasant doesn't mean the things beneath it are pleasant as well. Okay, these are all advice to the foolish man. Stanza 25. A foolish man thinks all who speak him fair to be his friends, but he will find, if into court he comes, that he has few advocates. Right, this is just like stanza 24, saying that just because people speak well of you among other people doesn't mean they will have your back if you one day find yourself in the court. When you are confronted with your fellow Norse, someone accusing you of some misdeed or insult or offense, who will speak well of you then? Who will stand up among the crowd and say those same good words they said about you in public when there was no court, when nobody was really paying attention? Very few. Okay, next stanza, 26. A foolish man thinks he knows everything if placed in unexpected difficulty, but he knows not what to answer if to the test he is put. Right, so this is, again, we covered some of this topic in samurai literature, is that it's very easy to say you know what to do and how to do it when arrows aren't flying through the air and some guy isn't bringing an axe down on your head that very moment. But if you put these people to the test, you will find out really quickly who knows what they're doing and who says they know what they're doing. And oftentimes it turns out that these two are mutually exclusive. Okay, stanza 27. Again, the High One wrote, a foolish man who among people comes had best be silent, for no one knows that he knows nothing, unless he talks too much. He who previously knew nothing will still know nothing, talk he ever so much. Right, so if you want to think of a modern day equivalent where you could draw some distinction or similarity from this, it's, I think the quote's attributed to Abraham Lincoln, where he said, it is best to remain silent and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. This is exactly what Odin is saying here, is that he's best to be silent, for no one knows that he knows nothing if he remains silent, unless he talks too much, and then everyone is kind of aware of the fact now that you are what they thought you were beforehand. When you were just a quiet idiot, now you're a talkative idiot. Right. It's best. It's also said, like, you were given 2 ears and 2 eyes and 1 mouth for a reason. You should use the other 2 twice as often. Okay, and now we go to stanza 29. He utters too many futile words who is never silent. A garrulous tongue, if it be not checked, sings often to its own harm. Right, and as we said in stanza 27, rarely does your mouth get you out of trouble. But more often than not, it will get you into trouble. So, as I said, and the adage goes, 2 ears, 2 eyes, 1 mouth. That means you should use the other 2 twice as often. Okay, move on to the next stanza. This is stanza 38. Leaving in the field his arms, let no man go a foot's length forward. For it is hard to know when on the way a man may need his weapon. Right, so this was good advice in 1270 or beforehand if you were living in the Dark Ages. Don't leave your weapon at home. Don't leave it in the field, because you walk a foot or more away of it, and if you need it but don't have it, what good is it to you? So again, as Odin would have you learn, being the spear shaker god, the god of war, you are no good without your arms. Don't even go a foot length away from it, because that will be far enough away that if you need it, you will not be able to deploy it readily and defend yourself or save your life. All right, that one's simple enough. Stanza 43. Odin said, "To his friend a man should be a friend, to him and to his friend. But of his foe no man shall the friend's friend be." Again, that's Yoda writing this thing, and you have to kind of like dissect this sentence. But what he's saying is, there's nothing wrong with being a friend to a man, and that if you meet that man's friend, it makes sense to be that man's friend as well. So a friend of a friend, right? But an enemy, when you encounter this person, you would also perhaps be wise to treat that enemy's friend as your next enemy. Because if you see this quality in this man as being an enemy, chances are he will keep the same company and associate with the same people. Therefore, an enemy is your enemy, and a friend of your enemy should be your enemy as well. That's debatable, but not a bad way to go about living if you're being cautious. Stanza 47. "I was once young, I was journeying alone and lost my way. Rich I thought myself when I met another. Man is the joy of man." Right, so how many times have you been lost or in a bad way, and somebody, a stranger, came up to you and showed you how to get home, or made sure that you made it through the night okay? This is where you find enrichment. Like the enrichment you find is within other people, what they do for you, and the value you get from that camaraderie and turning a stranger into a friend. And man is the joy of man. So that's a good passage. 49. He says, "My garments in a field I gave away to two wooden men. Heroes they seemed to be when they got cloaks. Exposed to insult is a naked man." Okay, so what Odin is saying here is that he gave his cloak to two wooden men. So what are two wooden men in a field? Well, those would be scarecrows, right? And if you know anything about farming, the scarecrow is designed to keep the crow from pecking at and eating the corn while it grows. The scarecrow is meant to fool the crow into thinking that the farmer is in the field and could possibly attack them if they swoop down at the corn. If you build a scarecrow and it's simply the frame, well, the crow is actually smart enough to figure out that this naked man, this frame of a man is not real. But if you give this man a cloak, the wooden man, the scarecrow, a garment to make him look more full as an actual human being, this will be enough to fool the scarecrow. And the scarecrow is the one that will give insult. So when you have clothes, when you look like you are a man, when you carry yourself as though you are a real man, you will avoid these insults. But a naked man, a one who does not have these things for himself to appear as someone worth taking seriously, this is the naked man that will be insulted by the crow, no one will take seriously. But if you have this cloak, if you wear the clothes of a man and act like a man, you will be given this respect. Okay, this is next one, stanza 55. "Moderately wise should each one be, but never overwise. For a wise man's heart is seldom glad, if he is all wise who owns it." Right, so you could probably, if you are someone who considers themselves higher IQ, higher intelligence, it's a curse and a blessing to be intelligent, because rarely do intelligent people find peace and happiness. They see a lot that's going on in the world. They ruminate over these things. They can't help but get over the fact that it's because of all these stupid people that all these problems exist. So the wise man has this blessing of being able to see these things, but a curse of being racked with just the overwhelming ever-presence of his own thoughts. So Odin is saying it's better to be moderately wise, right? Wise enough to know how to take care of yourself, but not so wise as to be constantly overcome with thoughts, ideas, and concerns. I guess that's really not up to you, right? Okay, next stanza we go to 68 and 69. And the High One said, "Fire is best among the sons of men, and the sight of the sun, if his health a man can have, with a life free from vice." Okay, yeah. So fire is the best among the sons of men and the sight of the sun. To be able to bask in the glory of the sun, to absorb its heat, and to have your health free of vice, this is true health. This is how life is meant to be lived. In the presence of the sun, in the daylight, enjoying things that give you pleasure because your able body is able to enjoy them because it's free of vice. And then we go to 69. "No man lacks everything, although his health be bad. One in his sons is happy, one in his kin, one in abundant wealth, one in his good works." Okay, so this is telling you to keep your chin up, right? You may have lost a lot. You may have come upon hard times physically, mentally, financially, but understand that no man has lost everything all at once. So count your blessings where you have them. Understand that this too shall pass, and that just because you are here in this period in your life without a certain thing or dealing with a certain issue, you will rise and you will fall based upon what the gods have designed for you, and that they will never take away strictly everything until it is time for you to close your eyes forever. All right, moving along. We go to stanza 79. The High One wrote, "A foolish man, if he acquires wealth or woman's love, pride grows within him, but wisdom never. He goes on more and more arrogant." Right, so, yeah, so I'm going to get a drink here. The wealthy man and the man who has acquired a woman's love. You know these people when they show themselves. It's the same mentality. It's the acquisition of something desirable, whether gold or a car or a house or a beautiful woman. These people, when they acquire these things, they grow arrogant in themselves because these things take on a life of their own. To possess the woman's love, to possess the wealth, this will breed arrogance. And this is a foolish man because he doesn't understand that these things aren't true wealth, because wisdom is far more valuable than any material possession or any woman that could ever love him. He never acquires this wisdom because he's too busy acquiring these possessions. Right. Okay. Dovetailing on that, 84, the High One wrote, "In a maiden's words no one should place faith, nor in what a woman says. For on a turning wheel have their hearts been formed, and guile in their breasts been laid." Okay. I'll leave that one. No sense in explaining that any further. We'll jump to stanza 95. And the High One wrote, "The mind only knows what lies near the heart. That alone is conscious of our affections. No disease is worse to a sensible man than not to be content with himself." Right, so this is actually a great passage to be read with Stoicism in mind, right? No disease is worse to a sensible man than not to be content with himself. This disease of ill content, this disease of desires and wants beyond that which lies within your heart. This is where happiness comes from, right? It comes from up here and it comes from up here. You do not derive happiness in this life by seeking it in the outside world. It's a disease to become so consumed with what is going on outside of ourselves, because a sensible man knows that his heart and his mind, his conscious mind, they share this connection. This longing and desire manifests in the mind with things he sees, and the heart harbors it for long term. But you must understand that this disease is self-inflicted. You must learn to be content with what you have and what you don't have. And only by doing this will you ever attain something that could be considered happiness. Okay. and we go to the last section. And I will explain this one on a historical note. This is from Odin's rune poem, and this is stanza 140. And Odin himself said, I know that I hung on a windswept tree 9 whole nights with a spear wounded, and to Odin offered myself to myself on that tree, of which no one knows from what root it springs. Okay, that's a cool passage. Actually, it's on the back of this shirt. That's how I know it so well. When I mentioned in this part right here about this was maybe used to convert pagans to Christianity, this passage is direct proof of that. So what do we know about the speaker? Okay, it's Odin, it's the Allfather, it's God the Father. What does he do? He hangs himself on a tree. This is the tree is Yggdrasil. This is the world tree. It is the tree that connects the 9 worlds of Norse mythology. Yggdrasil is the binding force of the universe in the Norse world. Odin hung himself on this tree for 9 nights, and nine has a very significant not impression, a significant place in Norse mythology. The number 9, the numerology of it is very sacred. The 9 worlds, the 9 nights. You see this number 9 recurring in Norse mythology over and over again. But he hung himself there, and he was wounded with a spear. But why was he hanging himself there? And if you read further in the rune poem, it was so that he could learn the magic of the runes, that he could learn to speak with them, and he could learn to use magic through them, to wield enchantment or to disenchant things. And as I said, J.R.R. Tolkien lifted much of his work from the underlying myths in Norse mythology. And definitely among these myths was the use of runes. You can see the elven races have their own languages. The dwarves use these same Norse runes to bind things or to enchant things or to leave spells of good omen. The Norse runes were used for language and writing, but they were also considered of a mystical nature, and that's why Odin hung himself on this tree. But what does this myth sound like? Well, it sounds a lot like Christianity, right? So Odin, the Allfather, hung himself on the tree. Christ was hung on a cross. Odin was wounded with a spear. Christ was wounded with a spear. And if you remember from the story in the Bible, the crucifixion, he's pierced by the Roman soldier in the side, and water gushes forth and not blood. And that was to indicate that the life-giving essence of water came from Christ the Son. No man would be pierced in the side and bleed water. He would obviously bleed blood. But this myth of Odin hanging on the tree, Yggdrasil, was used as a tool to see to it that the Norse reader perhaps used this lesson to ease himself from an understanding of paganism and move to a monotheistic practice of Christianity. And the story of Christ's crucifixion, the story of Odin hanging on Yggdrasil, wounded by a spear, to learn the magic of the runes, a sacrifice of himself to himself, Christ, a sacrifice of himself to God the Father on behalf of mankind so that we would have everlasting life. You see the similarities, right? Okay. All right, this one probably went on for a bit. But yeah, the Hávamál, very cool. We will continue on in the Norse literature series, and I will move to, we'll go to the Prose Edda, and then we'll move to the saga of King Hrolf-Kraki, and then the saga of the Volsungs, which is really cool. That is about the legend of Siegfried. Yeah, and I won't read those stories, obviously, cover to cover, because that's going to be, hours. But we'll take some passages and some paragraphs, dissect them, and talk about how Norse mythology interwoven with Christianity and the lessons that were being taught by virtue of both were conveyed in these great works of literature. Anyway, I appreciate you being here for this one. This is the intro part to Norse literature with the Hávamál. Yeah, cool stuff. So stay tuned for part 2 in the Norse literature series. And yeah, we'll pick it up with the prose edda. Till then, take care.